I just call it Zioreturns and LibertyDownUnder collab.
That works.
It should be live in about a second, dude. Twitch can take about anywhere from 10 seconds to a minute to stream it.
I might not be able to pop up your stream only because my internet's fighting for existence.
There we are, it's live. I'm just gonna link my channel though into the Discord. I mean the Twitter. I'm just so used to linking crap in Discord.
Since it's going through your channel, it'll automatically pop up on my Discord.
There we go, Stuart. So, what topic do you want to cover first? If you want to get the... how about we get the ball rolling with, what you were talking about with your, the paper you wrote.
Sure, native title, I guess, and Aboriginal sovereignty.
That's it. But I think that would get the ball rolling.
Well, it's weird because I'm so for your listeners, I'm a right-wing anarchist. So, this is probably not what you see coming from the right. Someone here talking about why we need native title and Aboriginal sovereignty. It's probably very left field.
It's not. It's not common.
I got trouble. I got trouble from libertarians saying, like, "Oh, how dare you, talk about this?"
Well, I got
told that I had white guilt and that sort of stuff, and I'm like, "Well, no, it's just."
And same with me. People say I'm not a libertarian because I support native title rights. Like you can be a libertarian and support the native peoples getting what they deserve.
Yeah, well, the way I framed it is sort of like property rights sort of thing, rather than making it, it's about, it's about Aboriginals and racism and making it a race thing. I made it a property thing. They had the claim to the property, they were using it, and then the British turned up and said, "No, it's ours now."
The British went.
The doctrine of terra nullius and said basically, no one lives here because once civilized, it's now our property. Use it ourselves for whatever we want to use.
It's like that meme. The meme with the British going, it finds inhabited land, the British. Is this land free?
Hippity hoppity, you'll enter my property.
Exactly. You can't take my land. I have a gun. You can't take my land. Bang.
Even in the US and New Zealand and Canada, when the British turned up, they at least signed treaties with them.
But that's because the Native Americans and the Maori people had chieftains and some sort of tribal governance that the British recognized.
Yeah.
So they went, your system's like us 1,000 years ago, so the British sort of got it. But the problem with the Aboriginals is their cultural structure is way different to what is considered normal by, European standards at the time.
Okay, well, I've got a question for both of you. And it's on that line of thinking. Would you call the Aboriginals farmers or hunter-gatherers?
I think they're an in-between state, to be honest.
I can't answer that question. I'm sorry.
Well, they hunted and gathered. They were hunter-gatherers because they were very nomadic people, and they hunted and gathered resources and hunted animals. But they also did some farming, but they weren't a complete farming society yet. They were sort of in this transitionary period. But that's just my point of view.
I guess it depends on which you talk about. Because I know that there were groups that did, look at, for example, their farming patterns. Sorry, their burn patterns for
You mean the back burning?
Yeah, the back burning. That almost looks like farming to me. And you've got I remember there was one, but I think it was in Victoria, they had a couple miles worth of fish traps they used to farm eels.
From what I remember, the European archaeologists a couple decades ago said, like, these were actually like after the. They said they weren't hunter-gatherers. They were more like what the Europeans were like pre-Bronze Age, around 10,000 years ago. So past the hunter-gatherer stage, but not a full farming society yet. Because when you go from hunter-gatherer to full farming, you stop doing the mainly hunter-gathering thing, but the Aboriginal peoples were a mix of both. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but it was foreign enough to the Europeans, to the British, that they didn't recognise it. And because they and this was brought up in Marbo, I'm pretty sure. Well, Marbo number 2.
One of them.
The British stance is if it's not farming, it's not civilization.
Well, it's not just that. Remember, they found African tribes that didn't have farming, but they had a chieftain-based, culture. So even though they were hunter-gatherers, the British still made negotiations with them because they saw you have a distinct leader. That means Europe. You
but
have.
Unfortunately, the Aboriginals didn't get the same treatment
Because
so they ended up, taking away and saying it's ours now. And that sovereignty was just taken away without anyone's consent. So that's the argument that I make for it.
Agreed. Like with
based on their property rights, that were taken away without their consent. They should have to claim the property.
Like with
However, having said that, people still live here like Australians, like Europeans and Asian immigrants
No.
still live here as well.
No, not to mention.
The whole sin of the father argument,
Like-
especially for migrants from outside of Europe, it was not their fault how the Aboriginals were treated by the original Europeans. So it's like they didn't have anything to do with that. So you can't
Like,
claim
to not name names, but my idea was, we don't take land off like you or me or the Australian homeowners, like the white people who have been here for generations. We take the land off Crown land or national parks, because the national parks are native land, and you could easily give them over to the Aboriginals.
And we know for a fact that the Aboriginals not going to destroy the environment like some Europeans would, some Australians would.
But like,
they're going to look after it, and they're going to keep it sustainable.
but like, so you agree that you could easily give, because a lot of the national parks were made because the government just went. The argument over white settlers and Aboriginals, and the government went, we can't legally give it to the white people, but we don't want to give it to the Aboriginals. There has to be a way to get out of this. Ooh, national park! The government did that a lot of times.
There's one case of Kawata and Joker Peterson where literally, like, the Kawata people went to the High Court, won that case, to get native title, and then the Queensland government went, you know what, we're going to make your land a national park. And then you can't use it.
So, like, for instance, I think you and I would both be in agreement that you could give the national parks to Aboriginal people, in that way they would have some form of land back. Would you agree with that decision if the High Court or the government ever said, oh, we're just giving all the national parks to the Australian Aboriginals?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think the problem you get, though, is that that's not all the way. So, yes, on one hand, that's a good idea. On the other hand, it's unfair to our Aboriginal tribes and nations whose land is now in, say, the middle of Perth.
Exactly. So you can't give all them. Now, we have sacred sites to, let's say, the Kamilaroi people, so that the people in my area, there are houses on a lot of their sacred sites, but right now the elders of my community are in negotiations with the council to make a treaty with homeowners, where they can perform sacred rituals, but in exchange the Aboriginals, for instance, one homeowner who lives on the other side of town, the Aboriginals want to perform ceremonies, right? So in exchange, the homeowner just has the Aboriginal people, like, take care of his garden. every once in a while. And the Aboriginals are fine with that. But what's your opinion of a thing like that?
Yeah, well, for example, there's one case that comes to mind, and that's the case of a body in Benel. It was
What year was that?
That would have been, I want to say 2008, I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think it was I think it was either a late Howard or early Rudd.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 08. And basically what happened there is they spent 15 years in court dealing with native title, and to no avail. And basically, it's they agreed to stop going to court. The government and the Aboriginal people said, okay, what we're doing instead is the Aboriginal people agreed to give up their native title claim. In return, they got access to resources and to land and a bunch of different benefits. They got $1.3 billion in compensation.
And for instance,
as an anarchist, I don't like that the financial part of it. You know,
no, I think with you know how mining companies can just mine if they find it because of government approval. I hate that. I think that mining companies and property development companies and farming should negotiate with Aboriginals to, for instance, let's say the mining company goes, well, we found a lot of insert mineral here. We would like to negotiate to be able to mine this, and you say give like 50% of the profit or something to the Aboriginals in exchange for mining their land. But the Aboriginals could still say no. It's just you have to negotiate with them is the point that I'd want.
Yeah, that's where the Greens come in, because
like
the Greens, unlike Labor or the LNP,
like
are actually going to have that conversation with people and say,
like
okay,
we've a lot of libertarians on the right say the Greens don't have any good policies. Their native title policies are the best out of basically any party in the country.
Yes, agreed.
Their native title policies are fair, justified, and well thought out. Unlike Labor's, which is a band-aid.
There are a couple I don't like, again, compensation because of being an anarchist.
Well, they deserve some form of compensation. The point is...
Yeah, I'm talking about like financial compensation using taxpayer dollars. Because again, sins of the father.
I think how you can pay for that is cut how much politicians get paid. Politicians minimum wage.
Yeah, that sounds fair. Actually, that sounds fair.
Just cut the politicians' wage and give it to the Aboriginals instead.
The other part I don't like is the idea of creating a third House of Parliament.
No, I think you can. You can have it, but the tricky part is how will it be? How much power will it have, and how will it be set up?
Because the argument that I've heard is to give them veto power over basically anything they want to.
Well, that's with Labor's.
That is literally making it a race thing. You know,
like
because you're Aboriginal, you can veto anything that anyone else does in the country.
Well,
don't like that.
That's Labor's policy. With the Greens' policy, it's meant to be stuff that actually affects their native title rights. From what I've read of the Greens' policies, so the Greens version of the third body of Parliament is meant to give the Aboriginal elders a way to veto unjust things that go against native title or their cultural beliefs. For instance, Aboriginals don't like the idea of vaccine mandates because it goes to, some of the ones in my town said it goes against their spiritual beliefs of I don't know the exact word, but it's an example of what that body would embody in the Greens version.
Yeah.
Like they can't just veto all property. They can't veto a tax hike or something like that. They can only veto stuff that has stuff to do with their actual cultural land. How would you feel about that version of that body of government?
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that.
Now,
be careful though that if it's just advisory, you've got to make sure people do that. You've got to make sure actually it is listened to. The last thing you want to do is create a body that is advisory and this gets ignored because
then it ends up as a tokenism.
It's a token because it's exactly my concern. If it doesn't have any, if it's not listened to, if it doesn't have any sway, then it is basically just a token thing, And then it's like, that can actually be seen as being quite offensive to them. And then you think, oh, we'll give you this and you'll be happy.
Like, they have a land council in my town, which is basically their ability is to, they have the legal power to veto property development. So, for instance, there's no mining in my town, but at one point they wanted mining in my town, but it would have been mining on an Aboriginal sacred site, and the land council completely vetoed it. So that's the power the land council has in my electorate.
How did the people react to that in your electorate?
Most of the people were fine with it because mine's a heavily religious electorate, so they were annoyed. But when the Aboriginal elders said, it's basically they equated it to, what would you do if someone tried to mine the area around the tomb of King Solomon or where Jesus was crucified, and the Christians understood where the Aboriginals were coming from after that, and the argument was dropped.
The argument that I've made is very similar to that. For example, I looked at Jerusalem. I gave that as an example. Or usually, whenever I get into discussions with conservatives and libertarians on this topic, and I say, well, in Jerusalem, right, it's owned by the Jews of Israel, but Christians have religious rights there. They can go there, they can worship, and they get the right to carry out their ceremonies and stuff.
It's like how
the religious aspect of native title, not to the whole thing, but to the religious aspect.
So it's the same with people of Greek descent. So like Greek, yeah. They can go to Greece and practice paganism at sites that were holy to the Greek pantheon. They are legally allowed to go to Greece and practice their ceremonies, even if it involves sacrificing an animal, or so long, because it's part of their culture in Greece. So the Greece government is fine with it. So same sort of equivalence?
Oh yeah, that is, yeah.
Which
although they're still Greeks.
But you get what I mean. It's
foreigners, but yes.
It's like they're Greek descent. They're natives of Greece, which means they have the right to practice their religion and culture on their native land. That's your point, right?
Yes.
It's like how if you're descendant of monk. I think I brought this up once. You're a descendant of monk in England. You can go to holy sites that normal people can't go to because you're a descendant of a monk. Like, some of the monasteries that are off limits to the public. If you're a descendant of a monk, you can visit them.
Or even English heritage. Because England's got millennia of history. If you're a member of English heritage, or I know some Australian members of Australian heritage who can do it. You can go over there and you can access these historical monuments that the public can't access because you're a member of English heritage. You go there in a group and you can access these monuments and stuff like that.
It's also the
But it's not the same thing, but it's kind of an analogy.
But it's also the homeowners thing, that if you're of an English native descent and you try and buy a home in England and you don't already own one, every other bidder, even if they bid more than 10 times you, will automatically lose because you are English descent and you're trying to buy native land. That's how English law works with home ownership, which is why the majority of people who own homes in England are English. Just because of that descendancy law. Which a lot of people call racist, but I don't see it as racist. I see it as them giving the native Englishmen access to their native land. They don't take the land off other people, they just give priority access to the native Englishmen.
I don't think it's racist to do that, I think it's just smart. I mean, you don't want to take land off people who, purchased it and already owned it, because that's not fair. But you also want to make sure that people who've been there, descendants do longer than anything, actually have a place to stay.
I think you make a good point. Do you think she makes a good point, Drew? I mean, Stuart.
Yeah, I agree.
Like she's made.
No, not Drew.
Sorry, I think about Drew. I hope Drew's doing okay, to be honest. I mean, we didn't get along, but he is a good guy. It's just we had difference of opinion.
Yeah, he's very anti-greens.
Yeah, he's very, which I'm fine with. I'm a green, and I'll die. I'll keep being a green until a better candidate appears in my elect. For instance, what electorate was Jerry in?
Louis, Brisbane.
Well, if I lived there, I would have voted for her. I would have voted UAP because I vote by candidate, not party. I will switch depending on how the candidate is, which people call me a flip-flopper, but my thing is, isn't this how you meant to vote? You vote for the best candidate, you don't just stay in your lane.
I mean, I don't know. Considering in my country, it doesn't matter if the candidate is fucked, you stick with that candidate. At this point, a Maytag dryer would be a better candidate than,
the U.S. two main party candidates for the last, let's just say, a long-ass time have always been really shit.
There's a joke now that's like, is your refrigerator running? Because I might vote for it. That'd be better than what we got, right?
Like, I'm a big proponent for native rights. Regardless of the country, I think it's not just Australia. America, the Middle East, name any country, I think the native people should have priority access to the land, but you shouldn't take the land off actual homeowners. You should take government land off the government and then give it to the native people. That's my thought process.
Wait, Tanya, I had something a couple of years ago. I heard something about one of your courts ruling that part of Oklahoma was given back to the Native Americans in the area. Did you know anything about that?
Yeah, 50% of Oklahoma is owned by the native people.
Now, isn't it true that usually when the government gives back native land, they take it off the Amish instead of it being government land?
Yes and no. It depends. It depends on where it is. Oklahoma, yeah, definitely.
California, yes. Because the Amish community is basically gone there.
Well, yeah. I mean, to be quite honest, I mean, the native population in California itself is dwindling because the government keeps, rezoning their land well, we live here now, and there's not enough of you, so we can rezone you into oblivion.
Yeah, that shouldn't be allowed to happen, period.
No, it shouldn't, but it does, and especially when you come from... And it's a hoity-toity blue state, so... The ones with a lot of bureaucracy and nothing to show for it.
No, that's not just one state. That's just the American government in general. Actually, that's every government in general.
No, but you have the one side who doesn't want to do anything with the native people at all. They don't care. They'd rather, you have the one side. The other side that goes, oh, no, native people, let's do things for them. And then rezones them into oblivion and then goes, we tried, but it was the other side that did the bad things, but we were good.
Yeah, the two-party system does not work, or as Drew and Stuart both said, you both said this at one point, democracy doesn't work. But I think out of the
third party, but no.
Stuart, I think you're the person out of all the Liberty Network who says it the most. Like you just
I hate democracy, mate.
you just beat it like a broken book on get there.
Well, the thing I hate about democracy the most is the mandatory voting side of things, which
The
I don't know
problem,
if you do about Titania, but we have mandatory voting over here. If you don't vote, you get fined.
well, technically you don't have to vote. You just have to go in and tick your name off the roster. You don't have to put a ballot. A lot of people don't realize that.
But yeah, but people are lazy, and I'm not trying to offend the Australians here. But no matter where you are, people are lazy. Having to actually get up and go do anything is a task in itself. Okay.
Hey Stuart, I know the main reason people vote in Australia. It's the free sausage.
It's not free in most places. You have to pay for it.
And rural, what the hell's wrong with you city bastards?
Well, yeah, you're rural, so the way it works over here is, you know, it's elections are always on a Saturday, so it's not during, you know, work week. You have a Saturday, so everyone's to go up and vote and line up and everything else like that. And if you want to pay for such a break, you can pay for it.
Well,
in some places it's free, some places it costs.
I've noticed in rural areas it's free. Like most really rural areas, like my level of rural, where you're in the arse end of nowhere.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm in a suburb of the loveliest of suburbs. No.
You're in Utah, the closest thing to Australia you'll get in America.
Yeah, I'm currently dying from the heat, and apparently, Zio's like, yeah, no, if you ever come visit Australia, you'll die of the heat here too.
I'm a Queenslander, it's fine. You know, we regularly get like in the 90s Fahrenheit in some where I am.
My average temperature in summer.
In the hundreds. You're down south, so probably it doesn't happen as much where you are.
No,
But
my average
the
the temperature for my town in summer is 110 Fahrenheit. Well, my town's a hot box.
So I should be fine, considering at the moment the average temp where I'm at in Utah is like between 100 degrees to 120.
Yeah, yeah, but you have air conditioning. I don't have that.
The modern amenities I will take.
But like for instance, Stuart, there's a lot of. I just think that the problem is with a lot of libertarian parties, they have no native title policy at all. And they go, oh, we don't need one because we don't believe in it. But the problem is, if you don't have any kind of, even if you don't have even a token policy, if you don't have any, they will instantly label you as a racist, xenophobic prick, and you're not going to win an election by being labeled that.
Yeah, that's a big reason why I wrote this paper on it. Is because I took the sense of it being property rights, so it's
like
towards the right, because
like
the thing is the right automatically says, oh, native title, okay, it's a left wing thing, you know, and then it's a race thing, and they immediately give it up for left and give that, and so
who's the Lib Dem candidate in Liberty Network? He seems to understand what
James.
James. He kind of understood what we were going for.
Yeah, but he's South Australian, and they can be pretty good on native title in South Australia.
But he's a libertarian candidate who got what we meant.
Well, he's coming from a similar legal background that I am. So
Like,
he also had a property law based approach.
And I just don't understand when you mention it. People instantly just think you're trying to take land off taxpayers. No, and no, I don't. And also, I don't want to raise taxes for it. You don't have to. You can just give state and national parks and crowned land to them. You don't have to take land off property owners in any way or form.
Well, people think when you're giving rights to one, or you're giving things to one, there's the automatic fear that they're going to take it from somewhere else, because unfortunately, I don't know how it works in the Australian government, but I know in American, it happens so often where it's like, oh yeah, no, we're going to give this group of people the thing that they want, but instead of allocating it so it's equal, they just yank it from another group of people and put it in, instead of like, hey, we can all have the same thing.
It happens here, but it's not as common as the American government does it.
But yeah, but there's still always that fear. It's like, how do we know? Sorry, and I'm coming from an outsider's perspective. It's like, how do we know what are you gonna define as equal to?
Well,
are you?
Well, there's no problem being an outsider. It's one of the reasons that I invited you on, and also Stuart was fine with, because we wanted a non-Australian perspective on this thing, because we can be secular perspective, but we can only see part of this picture, and having someone.
That's one thing I think we need to consider more is, we're compared to the US and to Canada, we're pretty new to this whole Aboriginal or Native rights issue. It's been dominant a lot more in Canada and the US.
Now
it's been around for a lot longer there than it has been in Australia.
But Australia has done one thing in the small amount of time it has been around. We've made decent steps in the short amount of time that it's been on the table in the right direction compared to. We've learned from the other countries. But
I can't speak for Canada, but I can definitely say from America, it's like we've had this issue since we've been a country. So even before we were a country, so I mean, we've had time to do something about it, and we really haven't. Other than the Oklahoma thing, that was the only good thing, because they drew down the. I think it's like, okay, before the settlers came in, how many tribes were here, and how much of the land did they dominate? And they found that they dominated 50% of it.
Like
50%, the government can't deal with.
So you remember during the War of 1812, you know how the British got a lot of the Native Americans on their side during that war? Stuart,
Yes.
You know how the British got so many on their side? They
gave them nothing for it.
No, they said in the arrangement they made that if the British won the war and reclaimed America, they would give a percentage of the American land to the Native Americans. They made a treaty and everything. It's just it had the caveat of the British winning. And since the war kind of ended in a draw, the treaty went nowhere. But the British made that treaty, and that was around the same time they were colonizing Australia. But you see how they differently viewed Aboriginals compared to Native Americans, because Americans had an actual tribal chiefdom system like the Maori people or Africans.
Yeah, well, the UK has a very bad track record with treaties.
No, but
during World War One, they said to the Jews, if you fight for us, we'll give you all of Israel. And they said to the Arabs, if you fight for us, we'll give you all of the Middle East. And neither side got anything at the end of the day. It all went to the British, to the French. So they got the best of keeping treaties.
But the point is, that they got to the table to make a treaty in the first place shows you how they viewed them differently. Because,
yes.
They actually went, okay, you actually have some semblance of society in the British's eyes, so they're actually more amenable, or is it amenable or amenable? You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, amenable to the party that they were negotiating with, because they actually saw them as a culture and society instead of a bunch of tribeless. I don't want to sound offensive, but you know what I'm getting into. How the British viewed they saw them as savages.
Yes.
They saw them as tribeless, nomadic savages that had no culture or creed. That's how Cook. Arthur Phillip was one of the only early settlers who had any semblance of respect for the Aboriginals. He wasn't great, but he respected them more than nearly any other leading settler of that era.
Well, it depends on the tribe. I mean, we have...
But you know what I mean? Like, if you just do the whole culture as a whole, they were on a higher magnitude of development technologically compared to the Aboriginals.
Yeah, Governor Philip King once said that I had ever considered them them being Aboriginals, the real proprietors of the soil. He didn't treat them that way, but he did say that.
Like he viewed them in a better light than Cook or nearly anybody else for a long time. And let's not get started on the White Australia policy, because that's one of the worst things in history.
Yeah, let's not go there.
For the people listening, I'll put this in terms. It's kind of very similar to what the Nazis did. In the level of bad.
Oh. Funsies.
It was bad, and it's why it's Australia's greatest shame.
Oh no, I'd say it's probably on par with the Aboriginal stuff. Not, yeah.
No, in fact,
those, and the way we treated the Chinese. So I know a lot of libertarians, like the Eureka Stockade, where gold miners stood up to their rights and said, you know, we want that. We're being taxed. Exactly the same.
That's where the
representation was an issue there, and licensing fees being way too expensive, and it's sort of against the British and got into a fight with the Victorian police force. In the end, they went to court and they won. But as a result of that, they said, you know what, we need to stop the Chinese. So since then, they didn't let the Chinese come here for the rest of the 19th century.
We've
got an extremely racist past.
It's just, for instance, the Australia white policy basically meant if you weren't from Western Europe or the Mediterranean or a British colony that was predominantly white, good luck immigrating to Australia for about 80 years.
There was a Czech Jew who was communist. He came over in the 36-37, I'm pretty sure it was, to speak out, to criticise the Nazis. And he was escaping, and he came to Australia. And they gave him they had what's called the dictation test. The border officers can choose to give anyone. They have to make them write down 50 words in a foreign language. It's usually the Lord's Prayer, but in any European language, even if the border security official just doesn't actually know that language. So he made the Czechoslovakian write the Lord's Prayer in Scottish Gaelic, and obviously he had no idea. But yeah, that's how racist it was.
Like, Australia was bad, and a lot of people say Australia wasn't that bad. We treated our natives probably the worst out of nearly any British colony ever. And that's saying something.
And even up till today, you know, our border policy is worse than Trump's. Because we're on an island, the Royal Australian Navy is patrolling at all times. And they usually take any and all illegal immigrants, put them on an island, put them there for 10 years to process them.
Here's Australia's border policy summed up in one sentence for everyone who's not Australian. Fuck off, we're full.
Yeah.
Basically, Tony Abbott's policy in the 2013 election was turn back the boats, is his slogan. Turn back the boats, and that won.
The thing was, that's okay to turn back the refugee boats, because remember New Zealand and Canada going, hey, you can turn back the boats and send them to us. And instead we shove them on an island for 10 years instead of giving them to the two allies that would take them. Fucking liberal government. Liberal governments are very bad on immigration. Labor's...
Gillard and Rudd also turned down the question.
No, like on the long run, like if you see Australian governments, Labor was usually better on immigration than Liberal. Like they both governments are fucked. They're just fucked in different ways. I think that's my opinion on the both major parties here. They're both fucked, just in different ways.
Yeah,
Same. Go ahead, sorry.
I was gonna say I actually prefer Labour to Liberals in many cases. Like my favourite Prime Minister is Gough Whitlam. Labour.
You know my favourite Prime Minister, it's Paul Keating, just because of his insults.
No, you're a libertarian. It should be Harold Holt. the guy who went swimming and disappeared.
And we named the pool after him.
Yeah, that's yeah. He goes and drowns. You know, we're gonna name a swimming pool after him. So in 1967, the guy goes for a swim at one of the beaches, and it's just him, and he drowns.
I believe
they never found his body. And then they go and say, you know, we're going to name a pool in Victoria after him. It's called the Harold Holt Swimming Centre.
Yeah, I bet.
How does that work?
I wonder, was like, is this in bad taste, the Australians? Now, who cares?
It's funny.
Australia has a very dark sense of humor, to be honest.
See, Americans used to have a dark sense of humor. What happened?
You went woke and now you're broke.
Pretty much. Yeah, no, I have a dark sense of humor, except I can't have a dark sense of humor. Because I like being employed. It gets really bad sometimes, because you're just sitting there, you're like, I have all this humor and things, and it's not hurting anyone. It's not gonna hurt anyone if they have actually, like, any sort of, like, backbone at all, but nah.
Don't hurt my fifis!
Nah.
I think Labour's economic policy is usually better internationally than Liberals, because Liberals usually fuck the bus internationally, so to speak. They're not good at making allies. They're very good at pissing off our allies, or sucking up to America so much it pisses everyone else off.
Yeah, why are you sucking up to us again?
Because the liberal governments are idiots. The Labour government is sometimes.
I hate how pro-US we are.
Well,
we're literally the 51st state. We're literally the 51st state of America. The example that I always go to is back in the 80s. So we have an alliance, and it's Australia, New Zealand, United States. We signed it in 1951. In the 1980s, there was a US nuclear-powered ship in the Pacific that wanted to go into a New Zealand port. Now, New Zealand had a law that said that no ships with anything nuclear on them, weapons or power or anything, can go into any of our ports. And then the US ship complained, and then the US government complained, and then Australia sided with the US over New Zealand.
Even though New Zealand is basically our freaking extra state, because in our constitution, it says New Zealand can become a state of Australia at any time. Doesn't it still stand to this day? I think.
Yeah. So back when you first started the
Federation,
having a debate about forming a country, Fiji and New Zealand both sent representatives to the original conferences.
Now, I think New Zealand pulled out because of how we treated Aboriginals compared to how they treated the Maoris. I forgot why Fiji pulled out.
I think it was over the South Sea Islanders, because Queensland used a lot of South Sea Islanders in the Pacific as basically slave labour. It's not our good. It's one of the darker parts of our history in That and the colonial, that and the native police force.
Also Pauline Hanson.
Yeah, true. I'll give you that.
Why are we
not?
not?
So Pauline Hanson hated Asians.
We're being swamped by Asians. It's a mess.
And that her parents' fish and chip shop is now owned by Asians.
Oh, when I first heard that, I nearly died. Because you couldn't make that shit up.
So,
You didn't see the most stereotypical shop ever, please. Let it be the most stereotypical shop ever.
Pauline Hanson is one of the most racist people in Australian politics. She literally wore a burqa, so she's in the Senate. She wore a burqa into the Senate as an argument for why we should ban the burqa in the country. Go figure.
She should have said, "I am the Senate." Like, now Australia's greatest politician of all time is Bob Catter. Just because the shit he says is great.
Can I pull up the let a thousand blossom bloom clip and play that on stream?
Yeah, I can actually pull it up. Give me a second. I can switch.
Yeah, pull that up. That's always my go-to to show people just how hilarious he is.
Oh, is that the one where he's like, yeah, no, this is fine. Let 1,000 blossom bloom, but I can't bother with that. I got this stuff to do.
Because someone gets eaten by a crocodile I forgot the exact thing. It's every couple of months in New South Wales.
Every 3 months, a person in North Queensland is torn to pieces by a crocodile. See, he goes from same-sex marriage to crocodile deaths. He famously said that if anyone in his electorate was gay, he would walk backwards from birth to another city. He literally said, "I'll walk backwards." And they found a gay person, and he didn't. Such a character.
Give me a second.
I swear, y'all politicians are fun.
Now, I have a lot of fucking, tabs up for reasons. I watch a lot of things at the same time because my brain can handle it.
Yeah, no.
Here it is.
And a final observation.
Tell me if you can hear it.
Same-sex marriage debate from Bob Catter.
I mean, you know, people are entitled to their sexual proclivities. You know, I mean,
should be on.
Let there be 1,000.
Unless you have Twitch muted.
No, Twitch isn't muted.
You know, but I ain't spending any time on it because, in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Like, Bob Catter was nuts. But there's a reason he... I think I mentioned, Stuart, that I wanted Bob Catter to be the Speaker of the House just for the fun of it.
Yes, you did mention that.
You mentioned the House of Representatives if he was the Speaker.
He's kind of like Joe Biden in the sense that he just says anything that's in his, like, he just blurts out random things.
Yeah, the only difference is Bob Catter's brain is still there, it's just who he is, while Biden is a fossil.
I have to agree with this.
One time he said that all Australian boys should be given firearms and be taught how to use them.
At school.
Okay, that's a good point. But then he said, but the girls can't. We can't let them use firearms. It's like, okay, you just ruined it. You had a good point and you ruined it.
How old is Bob Catter?
He's got to be in his 70s or 80s. I want to say 70s.
He is 77.
77. So that's what, 4 years younger than Biden?
2 years younger than Biden.
Okay.
But he's way more together than Biden. It's just Bob Catter has always been nuts. It's just who he is. And as I think you mentioned once to it, the only right-wing independents that aren't part of, like the Liberal or Nationals that get elected are people who are massive characters like Clive Palmer or Bob Catter or Pauline Hanson. That regular, everyday right-wing people, unless they're part of the Liberals or Nationals, are not going to get elected because right-wing is too individualistic to ever beat the left.
And the reason for that is that
The left
you
is...
don't have a state senate, so you have to be eccentric. So minor parties are usually pretty good at getting to the senate because with preferential voting, so you have like multiple senators from each region, and you can usually get minor parties in that way.
But when you get to the House of Representatives...
We haven't had a senate in Queensland in, I think, exactly 101 years. So what people have to be eccentric to get elected to the lower house then. So most of those eccentric political figures come from Queensland.
Or Tasmania.
Like Palmer, or Tasmania, because they've also got a weird system as well.
Well, they're all inbred.
They're our Alabama.
They're Alabama crossed with every other bad state. They know what they did.
They know what they did.
Fuck Tasmania, they know what they did.
Hopefully one day you'll elaborate on that, but I doubt it.
You're not Australian, you don't get to know.
Okay.
Stuart knows what I mean, though. Fuck Tasmania, they know what they did.
Yeah, at one point, they took all the Aboriginals from the entire country, or took the entire colony, sorry, in the 1800s. They literally took all the Aboriginals from the island, they put them on another island and said, you can't come back.
That's fucked.
Yeah!
So there are no Aboriginals in Tasmania who were descended from Aboriginals who were there when the British came. Because they were all either forced to move out or got killed.
Didn't they get moved to...
I think
the
skull of the last living Aboriginal woman from Tasmania is either in an Australian museum or a British museum.
Didn't they get moved to, I think,
They all got wiped out.
No, didn't the ones that got moved, didn't they get moved to, I think, the Torres Straits or something like that?
No, they were Bass Strait.
It was the Bass Strait.
Between Tasmania and Victoria.
Yeah, it was
So Flinders Island, I think, is where they were put.
Like,
but they can literally, the worst part of that, or one of the worst parts is, they can literally see Tasmania from where they were put. You know, they can see their home. They can never go back there.
You know my plan with the politicians, round them all up into Tasmania and just build a 50-mile high fence around it. Or nuke it. Either way, it's fine. Like, the left will, or, like, why the Greens one did so well this election is because the left is highly collectivist. They will vote for the left. Regardless. And that's something, Stuart, how does the right combat that? There's only really one way the right can combat it, but they don't want to do that because they would have to they'd have to be somewhat collectivist. Instead, they splinter into about 20 different parties, fracture the vote, and then wonder why the left keeps gaining power in this country.
There are three right-wing minor parties who all claim to be the Freedom Party.
The Lib Dems, the UAP, One Nation, One Nation, and Bob Catter. They all claim to be the Freedom Proist.
Not Bob Catter. No, I wouldn't say Bob Catter. He's socially he's right-wing, but he's also agrarian socialist. So
you know what I mean? He's pro freedom though. Like with his gun laws and the everything like that. It's just the right-wing people who don't want to vote for the Nationals or Liberals are going to vote for one of those four parties, and it splinters the vote from, instead of having like 12% of the vote, down to each having about 3 to 5% of the vote.
And then that say that because of the way preferences vote, because of how preferences work, it doesn't really split the vote in that sense.
But
like you know, in the votes in the end the parties still end up getting the correct amount of votes.
Well, not to the set.
1 to 4. You know, in the end, it will all work out the same way.
Well,
the
not
problem
the.
is the resources. It's the resources that you
Like
have.
they get less funding, they have less manpower to actually do, and sometimes the propaganda of the four parties will turn the people. Like a lot of UAP voters won't preference One Nation because of the propaganda that the UAP has against One Nation, even though
The UAP is just shit.
no
offense to them, but they're a right-wing populist party.
Okay, originally they were good for a while. Then they just started going, we want this pro-freedom. We no vaccine mandate. We want free healthcare. What the fuck? You can't have...
So, they're meant to be right-wing populists, but they support free education.
Now...
for tertiary stuff. They also, the guy who runs the Clive Palmer is a miner. Like, he ran a mining company. He now supports an iron or tariff to pay off our national debts. They're just crazy, that party. They have all the power in the federal government, but they can be libertarians.
A lot of people claim that Clive Palmer is basically the Australian Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And what he does, he's just nuts.
He is.
But unlike Donald Trump could unite Americans because you have a two-party system where he could easily gain power. Problem with Clive is he's stuck in a system that has about 20. So he has no chance of gaining power, and neither of the main parties is going to let him run under them.
So they spent, since the election, they just keep saying, oh yeah, there's election fraud.
Okay. Now,
of the same scale that Trump's claimed as election fraud.
No, to be honest.
Same thing in Australia.
Now, to be honest, there's probably some election fraud because there's fraud in every election, but to claim that it's to the level of it would change the result is highly preposterous.
And then they won the 6th Senate seat in Victoria.
And then they completely changed.
And immediately shut up about there being election fraud because they won a seat. They can't claim it's fraud if they won.
Now, you know the party...
No seats for one seat.
Now, you know the party I hate the most in the country out of any? Xenophon Center Alliance, because every Xenophon party is just fucked. It's a Xenophon party, they're fucked. Like, Nick Xenophon is just... Every party he makes just falls to pieces in like 2 years. You go, oh...
Weird centrist parties, South Australia, they're just so weird.
Well, like, Xenophon makes a party, and everyone going, oh, they want to ban this, want to ban that, and go, which party is it? Oh, it's run by some guy called Nick Xenophon. I'm like, give it 2 years and that party won't exist anymore, and Xenophon would have made a new party and completely changed his policies.
No, you just hate him because you're xenophobic.
No, I hate him because he can't even get a party to survive. If you're running for Prime Minister and you can't get a party to frickin' survive more than 2 years, I don't want you in charge of our government.
Yeah, I think he's done a couple that have all failed.
He has the Center Alliance, the Xenophon Party, I forgot the other one. Wasn't Jackie Lambie, originally working with Clive Palmer, I think, in the beginning? I think that's how she got her start, wasn't it? Around 2011 or something? Correct me if I'm wrong, Stuart, I just think that's it. Let me check. Like, for instance, I want to run for government in my country.
You have stated this, yes.
Now, for instance, I'm trying to get on the green ticket for the Senate in 2020. When the hell's the next election? 5?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to get under my state's Senate ticket for that election. Now,
What about council for next year?
My council election was last year, so there won't be one for 4 years.
your council elections aren't at the same time as your state level parliament ones.
No, they're the year before the parliament ones. That's how they work in my electorate. Yes, my electorate is weird.
Are you gonna run for the state elections in next year then?
No, because I'm gonna try and build up my support base in the Greens to try and secure the ticket. Because if I tried to get the ticket next year, I probably wouldn't get it. But if I tried in the next federal national election, I believe I can get a big enough support base from the people within the rural sector, the Greens. I should have enough push to get on the ticket.
Any word on
The split within the
word
Greens?
splits?
It's getting more problematic because of Adam Bant's you know, the flag. A lot of libertarian Greens are very pissed off at the moment about that. I think the split could happen in the next year or two, to be honest, because it's getting bad. Like the Facebook group has turned into just anti-debate, but they won't ban anybody because some of the mods are rural and some of them are urban, and neither wants to ban the other group because then it will just really hit the fan. So it's just based. It's
Both
just,
are annoyed that they just won't make the first move.
Yeah.
Do anything.
The thing is, now you remember, I think I told Centrist on Twitter what the split was. It's the urbans have the majority. I think I've told you that before in the party. But the split is around 60-70% of the party is the new woke. I don't like using that term, but you know, woke Greens. While 30 to 40% of the party is the Bob Brown era Greens. So how much percent of the vote is that if we look at the national? I'm just going to look it up. 2022 federal election. Because I forgot the exact number the Greens got, but for instance, the Greens got, where is it? No, let's see. Greens got 12.25%. So what's 40% of 12.5%, Stuart?
You're making me do maths. I hate you. I'm doing law school for a reason.
But
Buddy, you're asking us math.
wouldn't that be about 4.8%?
Like 5%, yeah, 4.8, yeah.
Yeah, 4.8% of the party is more libertarian. If it splits, that means the Greens' vote would just plummet to barely above One Nation levels.
To be honest with you, if you're throwing out percentages, if you just threw out a percentage, I would have agreed with you because, fuck, I'm not doing that math.
Now, also with this, for instance, I have heard talk in the thing that we do want to combine, if the Libertarian Greens happened, we do want to combine with the Aboriginal Party. So, you know,
Merge with the hemp party,
well, we were thinking of doing they're thinking of fusing with the Aboriginal Party and the Hemp Party to get the voting percent up, because they're the ones we're actually, you know, close to in, because our native title rights are very similar to the Aboriginal one, and nearly every other policy is similar to, yeah. But the point is,
So would you run for the federal seat for the election in the next election, or would you run for the Senate?
Senate first. If I can win a Senate seat, I'd run for the House of Representatives after that, and the next federal election. So basically, I'd run for federal seat in 2028, if it all works out. That'd be funny if I won Parks for the fucking Greens. That'd make national news, wouldn't it?
Sorry, you cut out a bit there. What did you say?
If in 2028 I somehow won Parks for the Greens, that would make national news as a shock result.
That would be. That's been national stronghold for how long now?
Since Federation. Why do I picture the Nationals going, how do we lose to a Green? The Nationals going, if we can... The Nationals are going, we lost our safest seat. Uh-oh. Because if a party ever loses their safe seat, they're doomed. My problem with the Liberals campaigned incredibly poorly this election. Like, they did not do anything right. They completely ignored the Green problem, which anyone could tell for like the last year that was going to be one of the big issues of the election. Like, you were going to win votes if you were pro-Green, and the Liberals completely ignored it. And when I was watching, you know, the lead up to the election and that was happening, I basically, I think about 3 weeks before the election, when they basically said they were going to do nothing on climate, I knew Labour would win. Because the Greens... Now people hate the Greens, but you have to give Greens the credits of one thing. Their grassroots campaign was amazing. What they did in those seats they won was very well thought out, well planned, and well done. Now, to be honest, I think the Lib Dems need a strategy similar to the Greens to, you know, at a grassroots level to gain ground. Now, I know a lot of libertarians would be annoyed at that, but you're going to have to campaign similar to the Greens if you want to gain ground.
No, I'm a big fan of the grassroots stuff. The problem is that Lib Dems have been around for as long. You just remember that the Greens are about 10 years older than the Lib Dems are. And the Greens didn't get their first seat until 2010 when they were 20 years old. So they didn't get their first seat until they were 20 years old, at the same age as the Lib Dems right now. And the Lib Dems have already had 2 senators. One of them was elected federally twice, and the other one was a senator for like a month. So that was one of the guys from Munster.
Well, like, for instance...
senator for a month before he stepped down.
The difference I see is the Greens, since the beginning, targeted very specific seats they knew they could gain ground in over election to election. And so over the course of an area, they slowly gain progress. While with the Lib Dems, their election results are up, down, up, down, up, down. There's no... There's usually not a current trend of them continuously gaining ground, and I think that's because they're not campaigning in the right way at the lower levels.
Where the Lib Dems just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, especially their election strategy right now.
But it's not properly... Like I think in 2013 was their best election ever, I think, right? They got like 4% of the vote?
Yes, yeah, that's the election where,
they gained a house... They won a house in the Senate, I believe.
Yeah, the Senate seat, yeah, Lion Hill.
Yeah, that was their best election ever, but you look at their election result this year, it's only about 1% of the vote.
Even though they ran in most of the seats. Well, to be fair, they did run
go take it
in
up,
Queensland.
Like, for instance, the United Australia Party gained seats this election, but that's just because they ran in more seats. Because Originally, they ran in a lot of seats, but just not. They didn't have candidates in every seat. So even though they gained ground,
the UAPs always have candidates in every seat. That's been there. They did that the last 2 times as well. They had a
That's
candidate
right.
in every seat.
But I think the difference is the candidates had more presence this time. Because like the one in Parks this time actually, last time he didn't do jack shit. This time he actually went out to the communities and talked to people. I think that's the difference. Like they actually got out and made their presence known compared to last time. It wasn't enough to win seats, but you know they adopted an actual community type approach. Like I think when I was on the Liberty Network channel at one point, I think I talked about how the candidate for Parks for the UAP actually went out to rural communities that like the Nationals and Labour never visit, and I think he garnered a percentage of the vote in my electorate because of that. But that's just my thoughts. Would you agree with that or not?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Now with the I'm looking at the Parks results, so there was a swing in the Greens' favor this time by 0.5%. The Liberal Democrats lost votes. Independents lost votes, but the big winner, this might surprise you, the big winner was One Nation in my electorate. One Nation went from 1% of the vote to 8% in my electorate.
Yeah, I think they almost won a Senate seat in South Australia. They did pretty well.
Now, Informed Medical Options Party gained percentage of the vote, and I think that's because of my electorate is very right-wing and anti, vaccine and all that stuff.
Oh, I think you need to have a shower.
I worked. I'll have one later. And the one party that I was surprised of how well they did was the Indigenous Aboriginal Party of Australia. They were registered last year, and this was their first election, and in New South Wales they gained 5% of the votes, but nationally they only had about 2% of the vote, which is not necessarily great, but for your first election that's actually quite. For instance, they beat out Katter's party in percentage of the vote.
Yeah.
Even though it was their first election, which I think is because a lot of Aboriginals don't vote in Australia, because they just go in and get their name ticked off if they even bother to go in. But I think the Aboriginal Party got the so that's why I think vote. You saw how wasn't the voter turnout this time a bit higher than last time?
I can check that right now for you if you want.
Let's see, 15 million this time. Turnout last time was 16 million. Actually, it was. How many registered? 91% of the people who were registered came out last. Yeah, it's a slight swing upwards. Not much upwards, but I think it's because. I think it's the same reason so many Democrats showed up in the 2020 election. It's just you were sick of this shit. Because, we had 10 years of Liberal government will get us to... The 10 years of any government will make you go, nah. Also, we need to end soon, so, anything you want to say before we round it up, Stuart?
No, I'm happy with that.
Let's see, you can link the Australian Liberty Network channel in case we ever use it again in the Twitch. I'll do that now. And I'll also link your Twitter.
Thanks. I've finally got around to fixing up my Twitter. So now my handle on both Instagram and on Twitter is at LibertyDownUnder, underspelled UNDR. For the longest time, Twitter was UNDR and Instagram was UNDER. It's not the same on both platforms to make it easier for plugging it.
And here you go, link to your Twitter, and I will link the ALN channel. I know we're kind of winding back, but I think we might do stuff every now and again on the channel. Just it won't be as, like, you know how you used to do it like nearly every week?
Yes.
I think it might be like a once a month thing now, or something like that. Now I can, if you do want to put this video up on there, I can I'm going to upload to my YouTube anyway, but if you want a copy of the vid to upload to that, I can give it to you at a later date.
Sure.
And that's it, everyone. I will be streaming again tomorrow, and see you all.